Welcome to Compound Insights, a podcast by CFA Society New York. I'm your host, Rob Rowan. Today we are kicking off a month of content at CFA Society New York in honor of Black History Month. And we're kicking it off with two people who have made massive contributions to diversity in financial services. Andrew Ofusu, CFA, is a director in the U.S. sales team at Aspect Capital, which is a $10 billion systematic investments company. Prior to joining Aspect, she was with Atos Alternative Management, based in New York City, and she was also a vice president in the hedge fund capital services group at Credit Suisse Prime Brokerage in London. Andrea is also the founder of the Black Hedge Fund Professionals Network, which supports the career of Black and brown professionals in the hedge fund industry. Andrea graduated summa cum laude from Colby College and earned her MBA from Wharton. Now, she is also joined on this call by Lauren Holland, who is a senior credit analyst and global head of paper and packaging at CreditSights. Previously, she served in analytical roles at Citi, Rayburn Advisors, BOE Securities, and Lehman Brothers. She is also managing partner of Wall Street Friends, which is the largest organic network of Black financial professionals. Lauren holds a BS in chemical engineering from the University of Oklahoma and an MBA with an emphasis in finance and entrepreneurship from Booth. So thank you all for being here at the beginning of what's an exciting month for CFA Society New York.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So, as people just heard, you both have enviable resumes and time-consuming jobs that occupy most of the people who are listening to this 100%. So what motivated you amid those things to start your organizations? Lauren, do you want to start?
Sure. And thank you for having me again today. So I've had a commitment to helping to open up pathways for other professionals, that are aspiring to be on Wall Street, be it, African American like myself, or through my Booth network or through my Oklahoma network. But, this is something that I've been actively engaged with, since I was an associate back at Lehman Brothers and used to do campus recruiting for them. So I want to say kind of like inherited Wall Street Friends. I'm not the founder of it. This network has been around for 30 plus years, but I came into a leadership position about 8 years ago. And, blood, sweat, tears, dedication to community have, really worked hard to build this network to over 8,000 professionals today. Now, as you said, it's definitely time consuming, particularly outside of my roles as an analyst, which I've done, been for over 20 plus years. But again, I feel like, that it's required because someone helped me get to where I am. And therefore, I feel like I owe that to others.
Oh, wow. That is a great thing. I've felt that obligation also from my mentor a couple times, so I completely understand that. Andrea, same sort of question. What made you decide, you know what, my alternatives career is just not enough. I'll do this too.
The network, Black Hedge Fund Professionals Network, really grew organically back in 2019. So I've worked in the hedge fund industry while mostly in sales roles, right? So I have a natural affinity for networking, for building community, and an understanding of the value of being, knowing the right people and being in the right circles. And so back in 2019, I had this idea to get groups of people together, professionals of color in the hedge fund industry, to just hang out after work, networking, especially understanding, having been in the hedge fund industry, understanding that a lot of opportunities tend to circulate via these networks, right? By the time a job gets on a job board, it's probably already been, it's been filled. Through connections and networks. And so, I understood just how important it is for us to find each other and leverage these types of networks for our career advancement. So that's how I started in 2019. And circle forward in 2020, with the confluence of COVID and George Floyd, COVID, as a silver lining, allowed us to think about a virtual platform that, from something that started as an in-person networking activity, mostly in New York City, became a national platform for this sort of type of networking. And then, with George Floyd and the introspection that came with this, both myself and the original kind of groups of people that had gathered to start this network, we felt that there was just so much more that we could do. A lot of companies were asking the same questions that we were asking ourselves. Obviously, something is not working, right? We've been talking the talk for a long time, and the numbers haven't really changed substantively. And so, what could we do differently? And it was through these types of introspective questions that we formed a board and started to institutionalize to say, beyond networking, there's a lot more that this group can do. We can be a source of a pipeline for the industry in terms of directing, especially younger professionals into the hedge fund industry. And it tends to be quite nebulous how you make the transition from college. Most folks in college probably don't even know about the hedge fund industry. So making the transition from college to the sell side and then to the buy side, how we can leverage our experiences to make that path a little bit more clear and then less nebulous. And so we formalized our agenda around these things, helping with the pipeline, and just making it a lot less difficult to break into the hedge fund industry.
Okay, so so maybe this is a good place to go over this. You made that sound very simple. It's like, okay, pipeline, nebulous, right? Got it. So, what types of things have you learned during your journey through this process that would be substantially interesting or motivating to the people who are listening to this podcast?
Yeah. One of the initiatives that grew out of this, thinking about the pipeline and how we become more intentional, is just how little information is out there about the pathway into the industry. So we're working with, now a group of about 50 or so young professionals, right? And these very bright individuals, a lot of them, some of them have already kind of found their way across different paths and into sell side roles. But yeah, I've had a few examples of instances where someone decides that they want to change jobs and they pick the first thing that kind of comes on their radar, whether it's a call from a headhunter, and it's beside the few and far between. But I see the consistent threads in terms of how the pipeline becomes leaky from someone who starts off in a pathway that could lead them to a very viable investments career, and the first kind of opportunity that lands in their lap, they take it, and it's derailed, right? They go into a role that takes them off. And I'm particularly interested, especially with the young professionals interested in investing roles. That's really where there's a death of diverse talent. And so working with these younger professionals, I see just how that pathway gets derailed, how the pipeline diminishes by virtue of that lack of information on, have you leveraged our network? Have you talked to people in this network? Have you sent your resume to people in this network? Rather than just taking the first thing that comes your way. That's been one of the kind of the most clear-cut lessons I've learned in terms of just how important it is to get information out to young professionals.
So, Lauren, are there particular things you've learned during your 8-year journey that are similar to that?
Yes. So, everything Andra said is absolutely spot on. It's about leveraging the network. But, the flip side is that the network has to be, present and available to have those conversations. So, one thing that we have found historically was that, young people, may feel, if they shoot an email to someone and they don't immediately get a response, they may get discouraged, and then feel that that door is closed. But, it does require two things: preparation and persistence on behalf of the candidate, of the person that is seeking. But it also requires, people at different levels, within the industry, being available and being receptive as well. And I think that, the second part of that is definitely getting better. I would say, probably within the last, 5 to 7 years, I definitely think that, experienced professionals are doing a better job at this, particularly because as it has been. So as far as the lack of representation, it's kind of like you always know it, as a professional sitting in the seat, because there are so many instances where you're the only, right? So, but, now that, again, post George Floyd, these numbers and, audits and all that kind of stuff, that like the lack of representation is actually really being put out there. Like, the data's there. I think it has made a lot of more mid and senior level people kind of wake up and say like, hey, okay, this isn't just the case where I sit. This is the case in the industry, period. And I can have an active hand in making a difference because there's a tremendous amount of talent out there. Obviously, both Andrew and I come from, very prestigious, business schools where, it's commonplace to kind of, source for talent, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't find, qualified and capable talent, at other programs. Right. So, but again, that requires, access and people that are already in the seats, like I said, particularly mid-level and senior level people being receptive to helping, open those doors and support, support like casting a wider net and basically, leveling the playing field, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was, when I was doing some research about this podcast, I was looking at some of the data that you just mentioned, and a lot of it's only like 2 years old.
Yep.
And I did have this aha moment where I was like slapping my head and saying, we don't only count this for 2 years? Are we crazy? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been, again, it's been more topical in the last 2 years, but it's not like these studies haven't been done, over the last, I mean, like I said, I've been in the business for over 20 years. So, you see them from time to time, but it's really that, this data is definitely being made front and center over the last couple of years than it had been in the past. But again, like I said, those of us that sit in the seat, like we know this to be our reality because,
right.
because we can see it.
Yeah, right. So, well, one of the reasons that I really want to do this podcast is because a lot of the people who listen to it are in roles just like yours. There are people who've served various roles at alternative investment management firms, hedge fund firms, private equity, et cetera. And many of them sit in analytical roles, whether portfolio managers or analysts. So if, you could, I hope this is motivating some of them to see what they can do to help where they sit. So if you can maybe give some advice to someone who is motivated by this or maybe some of the other things they've seen and doesn't know where to start, what can they do?
I think the start is with kind of, closing your eyes and opening your mind when you think about how you are evaluating talent. I think that's number one. I could just tell a personal story about this. I did my summer internship at DLJ. And, it was basically a dream come true for me because after I read 3 books, Liar's Poker, Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun by Reginald Lewis, and then Predator's Ball, I knew exactly what it was that I wanted to do. And I knew that I wanted to work with the guys that were in Predator's Ball, right?
Okay.
So it literally, like I said, by pure just, luck, whatever, I was able to, work on the desk with, one of the, with someone from, Predator's Ball, like basically a very central character that ran the high yield group when I was a summer at DLJ. And and it's so interesting. So even further than that, the reason that I got the seat on that desk for the summer is because the gentleman was head of distress research at the time. We all had to do like our rotations to determine like where you were going to sit. And he was like, you're the only person that came and sat here and wasn't like falling asleep like during, like while we were talking. I was like, seriously, like, because obviously I was very engaged because I knew that this was my seat. This is where I wanted to be. I wanted to be on the stress desk. And sure enough, I got the seat. But again, that gentleman evaluating me was not like, he looked, like I said, closed his eyes and opened his mind and realized like, hey, like there are a bunch of other people, like, cause there were like 20 other people in my class that he could have picked, but he picked me. And that was really very much the starting point, for my career, in high yield research. So I think there just has to be more of that.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. It is so interesting. Just one quick programming note. For those of you who are under a certain age, DLJ stands for Donaldson, Lufkin, and John Rett, which I think was bought by Credit Suisse. Is that right?
Yes, in 2000.
2000.
Yes, 2000.
It was a great
sorry
firm,
about
but
that. I totally just aged myself.
Yeah, I did say you could use the acronyms. That was my fault. So, Andrea, same question. How would you advise someone who wants to get involved now?
Yeah. I love the expression that Lauren used about closing eyes and opening minds. And the more I've been involved in this work, the more I realize just how ingrained the affinity biases that you determine certain hiring practices in our industry, how pervasive and persistent it can be, and oftentimes not intentional. I've encountered or don't encounter a lot of people who go out of their way to say, I don't want a woman on my team. I don't want a Black person on my team, right? But what does often happen is the affinity bias driven inclinations to want to be surrounded by or hire someone that looks like you. And we say that often, right? But we take for granted just how pervasive that can be. Right? And so, as an anecdote, I was at a conference the other day, DI panel that I was sitting and listening to, and someone mentioned, one of the panelists mentioned how they just don't understand all of this drive for DEI, and in their mind, meritocracy should take precedence. We should always elevate meritocracy in our hiring practice. And in the same breath, mentioned how they're in the process of hiring for an intern, and they just like the security of going to their networks to source an intern, right? And the fact that disconnect, again, you'll be surprised just how pervasive that mindset is. Nothing kind of malevolent about it, but the fact that disconnect didn't register for someone like that it's inherently not a meritocracy if your inclination is to tend to ask friends when you're making a hire, or go to the same sets of people, or go to the same sets of networks. And it's in these practices that oftentimes women and professionals of color are disadvantaged, right? We've not, I grew up in a developing country. I grew up in West Africa. I only came to this country for college. And so, the history of this the setup means that we're just not being a part of these types of networks for a while. And so if, that inclination to hire within networks continues, the numbers will remain, what they are. And so the challenge I've always given is just, for folks to be conscious of how these types of affinity biases play into their hiring practices, and challenge themselves to go outside of their preferred networks, preferred sets of schools when they're hiring. It sounds easy, it sounds like a low-hanging fruit. It just sounds easier said than done. To really kind of break away from this instinct to like, I'll just call a friend, call my friend, and they'll make a recommendation. It's just it's comforting when the hire is someone that comes recommended by someone but that practice has oftentimes been at a disadvantage to folks like us.
Right, and it seems like a sort of, to me, an easy trade. All you have to do is relieve yourself of the comfort of the familiar and the bias it causes, because it's a two-way street, right? So,
right.
Yeah, and so and I do also appreciate the close your eyes and open your mind.
That's great.
So perhaps we should leave it there. Thank you both for being here. So to the folks listening to the podcast, if you're interested in hearing more about this topic, please register for CFA Society New York's event on February 23rd, honoring Black History Month, Empowering Change in Investment Management, at our website, cfany.org, and you can hear both of these people speak there.